The morning was pale and still, and the city had not yet found its voice. She stood by the window with a small suitcase resting near her feet, the sound of her own breathing steady like a heartbeat against the hush of dawn. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of change, afraid of staying, but something inside her had shifted in the quiet hours of the night, a truth that whispered, "You can begin again." She touched the cool glass and watched the first light slide across the rooftops, each golden line a path leading outward. She had no map, only the soft certainty that peace waited somewhere beyond this place. She stepped outside, the air crisp against her skin, the street empty except for the hum of distant traffic. She carried nothing more than a few clothes, a small journal, and the worn photograph of her younger self, the one who used to laugh easily, the one she had promised to find again. She walked without looking back, each step a promise to her future self that she would never lose her voice again. The bus station smelled of coffee and early morning rain. She sat by the window, her hands folded in her lap as the city blurred into open road. She felt the weight of years lift slowly, like fog melting in sunlight. She did not know what would come next. She only knew that freedom tasted like this thin, sharp air rushing through a half-open window. She wrote one sentence in her journal today: "I choose myself." And when she saw the words, she smiled, because for the first time in years they felt true. She reached a small coastal town by noon, the ocean waiting like a patient friend, waves folding gently over sand. The sound filled her chest with something close to healing. She found a tiny room above a cafe owned by an older woman with kind eyes who asked no questions, only handed her a key and said, "Rest as long as you need to." That night, she lay awake listening to the sea, each crash and retreat reminding her that everything broken could find rhythm again. Days passed, and she began to move differently, walking along the shore, collecting shells like pieces of forgotten strength. She started helping in the cafe, washing dishes, sweeping floors, the simple motion of work grounding her, the scent of roasted beans, the chatter of morning customers, the laughter of strangers. She was invisible and free. She learned to breathe without waiting for permission. She watched the horizon each morning and whispered silent thank yous to the waves. One afternoon, she saw an old sketchbook for sale in a thrift shop, its pages empty, its cover worn. She bought it for $1 and carried it home. She had once loved to draw before life became small and quiet. She opened the first page and let her pencil wander, lines turning into shapes, shapes into colors, until an image formed of a woman standing on a cliff, wind in her hair, face toward the sun. She stared at it for a long time, realizing it was her. She was drawing the version of herself that had survived. Soon she began sketching every evening, filling the walls of her little room with color. People from the cafe started noticing, asking if she sold her art, and she laughed softly because she had never thought of it that way. But something inside her stirred a spark she hadn't felt in years. She spent her nights painting stories of strength, of storms turning to sunrise, of hands reaching toward hope. She didn't know that these paintings would one day become the seed of a brand, the voice she had once lost returning as art. By the time summer came, the cafe owner offered to hang a few of her paintings by the counter, and travelers began asking who the artist was. They saw something in those colors, something honest, something brave. She began signing them with a single name, Grace, her middle name, because it felt like what she had found. One evening, she walked down to the water and watched the sunset spill gold across the sea. She felt the salt wind on her face and thought about how far she had come from that silent apartment and the long nights of fear. The horizon seemed endless and kind. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you for giving me another chance." Her heart steady and open as the tide. She knew this was only the beginning. The days grew brighter as Grace found rhythm in her new world. She would wake before sunrise, make coffee in a chipped blue mug, and watch the sea through the small window of her room. The sound of the waves became her metronome, guiding each breath, each brushstroke. She painted until her fingers were flecked with color, her soul unfolding quietly across the canvas. People began stopping her on the street to ask about her art. She would smile shyly and tell them she just painted what she felt. She never realized how deeply those feelings resonated until one morning a traveler from New York asked to buy 3 pieces to take home. He said they spoke of courage. He said they felt alive. She packed them carefully, her hands trembling with disbelief as he handed her the money. It was not much, but it felt like proof that the universe had seen her. That night, She could not sleep. She sat on the floor surrounded by half-finished canvases, her heart wide open. She whispered to herself, maybe this is the beginning. Maybe I can build something real. She took out her journal and wrote 3 words, Grace by the Sea, and underlined them twice. It would be the name of her little art brand, a symbol of everything she had learned about healing through creation. She worked harder than she ever had. She painted in the mornings, helped at the cafe in the afternoons, and in the evenings she walked along the shoreline collecting driftwood shells and sea glass, using them in her designs. The locals began to call her the girl with the ocean hands because every piece she made seemed to hold a whisper of the tide. She began to sell small prints at the market, and every time someone smiled holding her art, she felt stronger. As months turned into a year, Grace's small brand began to bloom. The Traveler from New York posted her paintings online, and people started asking where they could find more. She learned how to build a website by watching tutorials on an old borrowed laptop. She took photos of her work in the sunlight, naming each piece after the emotions she once thought would break her eyes. Stillness, renewal. Her art became a quiet movement, a language of survival. One day, a woman wrote to her saying that her painting called Rising Tide had given her strength after losing her job. Grace read the message 3 times, tears filling her eyes. She realized that her art was no longer just about her. It was about every person trying to rebuild, every soul searching for light in dark water. She promised herself to never stop creating from truth. She began to receive invitations to display her work at small galleries, each one a new step in a path she could never have imagined. She spoke softly when asked about her journey, never telling the full story, but always ending with the same words, healing begins when you believe you deserve peace. Her voice steady, like the tide she once feared to face. As the brand grew, she registered her small business, using her savings from the cafe and the paintings she had sold. She learned about packaging, marketing, and online stores. She stumbled often, but each mistake became a teacher. She would laugh, sometimes thinking how strange it was that the woman who once doubted her worth was now building something that touched lives across oceans. One afternoon, a journalist visited the town after hearing about the artist whose ocean-inspired work was spreading across social media. Grace agreed to an interview, hesitant but hopeful. They sat by the shore, and the journalist asked what her secret was. Grace looked toward the water and said quietly, I paint what it means to survive. That line would appear in the article that later went viral. Within months, orders began arriving from across the country. Grace by the Sea became more than a brand. It became a symbol of hope, featured in magazines, praised for its authenticity. She moved her workspace from her small room to a sunlit studio near the coast. The cafe owner who had given her shelter now worked alongside her, helping pack art pieces with the same kindness she had once offered in a key and a quiet room. Every evening, Grace still walked to the ocean barefoot, letting the waves cool her skin. She would whisper small prayers of gratitude, not to erase the past, but to honor how far she had come. She no longer carried the heaviness of fear. Instead, she carried stories of transformation, of women and men who found courage. Through her work, she realized that healing was not a destination, but a rhythm, like the ocean itself, sometimes calm, sometimes wild, always moving. Her art began to expand beyond paintings. She started designing journals, candles, and handmade jewelry, each item crafted with words of strength etched into them. Breathe, rise, bloom. Her customers called them little anchors of hope. One night, as the wind swept softly through her studio, Grace stood surrounded by boxes ready to ship across the world. She thought of the girl who once sat on a bus clutching a suitcase and a broken dream. She thought of how far that girl had come. She smiled and whispered, thank you for not giving up. Grace woke before sunrise, her heart already awake, with the sound of waves whispering through her window. The studio smelled of salt and paint, the quiet hum of creation all around her. She had grown used to these early hours where the world felt wide and still, her hands steady as she brushed the final strokes of a painting called Becoming. It was a piece filled with soft gold and pale blue, the kind of colors that spoke of second chances. She stood back and looked at it, feeling a rush of peace move through her. Orders from around the world now filled her inbox, messages from people who said her art had helped them remember their worth. She answered every note herself, because to her each message was not a sale but a story, a small echo of her own beginning. Grace by the Sea had become a name whispered with hope across platforms and magazines, yet she remained the same woman who once sat by the cafe window dreaming of what could be. She started hosting small workshops at the coastal town, inviting anyone who wanted to create something from a heart. They came from near and far, people who had lost jobs, homes, direction. They painted together under the open sky, laughter mixing with the smell of the ocean. Grace taught them not how to paint perfectly, but how to paint honestly. She would say there is beauty in every scar and strength in every crack. When the wind lifted her hair and sunlight touched her face, she looked like someone who had learned the language of light. Her workshops grew into retreats. People began to call her an artist of healing. She smiled when she heard it because she knew healing was never finished. It was a song that kept changing, but she was grateful to sing it. She created a foundation from part of her earnings to support women learning new skills and rebuilding small businesses. She named it the Second Light because she believed everyone deserved another sunrise. At the first event for the foundation, Grace stood before a crowd, her voice steady. She told them she once believed life was something that happened to her until she realized life was something she could create with her own hands. She did not speak of pain. She spoke of transformation, of the power that lives in small beginnings. And when she looked into the faces of those listening, she saw the reflection of her own journey multiplied across countless hearts. Years passed, and the brand reached places she had never seen. Her art displayed in galleries, her journals and candles sold in stores, her name spoken with admiration. Yet she never moved far from the sea. She still kept her small home above the cafe where it all began, its walls lined with her earliest sketches, reminders of the woman who dared to start over. She would sometimes visit the cafe, still run by the same kind owner, and they would share tea in silence, a quiet gratitude between them. One evening, as the sun fell low and painted the sky in orange and rose, she sat on the beach, sketchbook open, her hair loose in the wind. She began to draw not a landscape or a face, but a symbol, a wave turning into a wing. She did not know why she drew it, only that it felt right. It was the merging of her two worlds, the past and the future, the pain and the freedom, the ocean and the flight. She decided it would become the new emblem of her brand, a reminder that strength is not just surviving, it is soaring. Her company continued to grow. She was invited to speak at conferences where people came to hear her talk about creativity and purpose. She told them her success was never about profit, it was about presence, it was about choosing to live with intention and compassion. She told them that the truest art is the art of living fully, and when the audience rose to applaud her, she bowed her head in humility, knowing that the real applause belonged to every person who ever found courage to begin again. On the 10th anniversary of Grace by the Sea, she held a celebration by the shore, candles glowing in glass jars, soft music drifting over the waves. Her friends, her team, her supporters all gathered in a circle. She looked at them and saw a living portrait of what love could build. When fear was no longer in charge, she raised her glass and said quietly, "May we always remember that even the smallest act of creation is an act of hope." The crowd cheered, and laughter filled the night like stars scattered across the dark water. Later, when the crowd was gone, Grace walked alone to the edge of the sea. She felt the cool tide wash over her feet and closed her eyes, the moon bright above her, the air gentle and kind. She whispered, "Thank you to the universe, not for the success or the recognition, but for the journey itself, for the chance to become someone who believed in light again." She opened her eyes and smiled, the horizon shimmering, endless and alive. And in that moment, she knew that her story was not one of survival anymore. It was a story of becoming, of belonging, of grace. The morning air was soft and still, and the ocean stretched wide like a promise. Grace walked along the shoreline, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. She carried her sketchbook and a small bag of finished pieces ready to send to galleries across the country. The horizon glimmered faintly in gold and rose, and she felt the rhythm of the waves echoing the rhythm of her own heart. Every step forward, a reminder of how far she had come. She thought of the young women who had joined her workshops over the years, some timid, some bold, all searching for a way to find themselves again. She smiled, remembering the letters she received, each one a story of courage, a testament that her own journey had multiplied across hearts she once believed fragile, now resilient. She knew that every stroke of her brush, every carefully crafted candle, every journal filled with words of hope was more than art. It was a lifeline, a whisper that they were not alone. Grace had grown older now, but not heavier. Life had left marks, but they were soft with memory, and learning her studio expanded to include a small team of artists who shared her vision, people who had found her story online or through friends and had come seeking mentorship and inspiration. She guided them with quiet patience, showing them how to turn what felt broken into something luminous, how to move through fear into creation, how to trust the strength that lived in their own hands. One afternoon, she received a message from a young woman who had lost direction and self-belief. The message was short but powerful. "I painted for the first time today, and I feel like I can breathe again." Grace read it 3 times, her chest warm, her eyes softening. She picked up her pencil and began a new sketch. She drew a wave lifting a tiny figure toward the sun, a symbol of all who had begun again because someone else dared to begin first. She placed it on her desk and whispered quietly, "May it carry them safely forward." On the anniversary of leaving her old life, she returned to the tiny room above the cafe where it had begun. She looked at the worn floorboards, the chipped mug, the small window where light had first reached her, and as she felt gratitude ripple through her body, she no longer carried fear. She carried memory, she carried lessons, and she carried hope. The woman she had once been, the one who believed she could not move forward, was here, and also gone. She had become someone larger than circumstance, someone who could hold storms and sunrises in equal measure. The town had grown around her, but the ocean remained constant, the tide rolling and retreating, teaching patience, teaching flow, teaching that each day was a canvas, each moment a chance to paint the life you wanted to live. She often walked along the shore with a group of young women, sharing their stories, laughing, sometimes crying, their voices blending with the gulls and waves. She realized that her own voice had multiplied in ways she never imagined. The courage she had claimed for herself now, moving outward, touching lives across continents. One evening, she stood at the edge of the water, the sky a deep twilight filled with stars. She looked down at the sketches she had created over the years, the objects she had designed, the words she had written into journals, the candles she had lit. She realized that every creation had been a step toward freedom, each one a marker of resilience, of beauty born from challenge. She whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for letting her carry this story, for letting her life become a living piece of art. Grace looked to the horizon, the ocean reflecting the starlight in glittering waves. She knew the future was endless and kind. She knew that storms would come, as they always did, but they would never define her. She had learned to meet fear with action, to meet silence with creation, to meet uncertainty with hope. She lifted her arms as if to hold the universe in her hands, and she felt the pulse of life flowing through every part of her body, the rhythm of survival transformed into rhythm of becoming. She turned back toward the small town, her steps light, her spirit steady. She could see the lights from the cafe flickering warmly. She could see the path she had walked, from fear to faith to freedom. She knew that her story was not hers alone. It belonged to every soul who had felt trapped, every hand that had trembled over a brush, every heart that had longed for permission to shine. She smiled because she knew that she had built something that would outlast her years. Her voice carried in the work she had made, the people she had touched, the lives she had changed. The waves whispered behind her, the moon reflected in the water like silver ink, and Grace breathed deeply, knowing she was whole, she was free. She was a creator, a guide, a witness to the beauty that comes when one refuses to let past pain define the future. She stepped forward into the night, letting her footprints be washed away by the tide, knowing that what she had built could never be erased, that courage multiplies, that hope spreads, and that the quiet act of choosing yourself can become a light for the world.